Hey guys, today we're going to be learning a little bit more about federalism. At this point, we've probably already read the iCivics article about federal and federalism and worked on some vocabulary about it, but we're going to get a little bit more specific and take some notes on it. So you should have a note sheet in front of you to write this down as we go. And if this is an ed puzzle, you'll also be answering those questions too. So federalism and the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States establishes the principle of federalism. What is federalism? Federalism is the division of power between the states and the national government. Every citizen lives under two governments, the national or federal government and the government in the state where you live. So here in Virginia, we live under the rules and regulations and rights and freedoms of the U.S. government, and also the rules and regulations and rights of the Virginia government. The federal government is the big government with its center located in Washington, D.C. It is sometimes referred to as the central or national government and is headed by the president. Please double check that you are writing down these notes as you go. The government in each state is headed by the governor. So as we'll be learning, the governor of Virginia has a very similar role to the president, except it only applies to the state of Virginia. He wears the same hats and has the same roles as the president, but in the state of Virginia. There are 50 different state governments, so if you were taking the civics class in a different state, you would be learning some different things because every state has its own constitution and does things differently. More about federalism. The U.S. Constitution created a federal form of government, as we said, ensuring the national government is supreme. Article 6, Section 2 of the Constitution is the Supremacy Clause. Remember, we talked about this before with little Eddie Jackson stopped a super rat. Well, that super is referring to the Supremacy Clause, saying that national laws are more powerful than the state laws. The Constitution is more powerful than the Virginia Constitution. So let's get a little bit more specific of the powers of the national or federal government. And you may want to jot down that phrase next to these things in your note sheet because I noticed that there is not a subheading on that section. So you might want to remember that the following things are powers of the national government. That the national government conducts foreign policy. We don't want to have different policies, 50 different policies for 50 different states relating to Iran or Cuba or France. As a nation, we have one policy in our relationships with other nations and our allies. Also, the federal government regulates commerce. Remember, this only has some to do with tariffs and trade agreements, but it also has to do with regulating businesses, that Congress can regulate discrimination, that the businesses can't discriminate in their hiring practices. Congress can regulate businesses in their pollution, that they aren't make sure that they're not polluting too much. All of those are ways that we regulate commerce, and another word for commerce is business. And they provide for the common defense. We have the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all carrying out the U.S. foreign policy. But even though we have the federal government is supreme, that it guarantees that some powers are reserved or saved for the state governments. So when the states decided whether or not they were going to join with the United States of America, they wanted to make sure that they would keep some of the powers that they had when they were their own little colony and had their own governments. They wanted to make sure that they would be able to decide some things differently based on what their state prefers. So some of the things that are for the powers of the state government are coming up. This is a picture of the General Assembly in Virginia. The General Assembly does things very similarly to how Congress does it, but the laws passed in the General Assembly are only for the state of Virginia, whereas the laws in the U.S. Congress are for the whole nation. So states promote public safety, health, and welfare. Why do we have federalism? The framers of the Constitution wanted to limit the government. Remember, they wanted to protect our rights and our freedoms from a government that would try and take those away and become tyrannical. We wanted our country to stay free, and part of that is to make sure that we don't have a government that is deciding everything for us. So we have limited government because we separate the powers, we have limited government because of checks and balances, and also because of federalism. And also, states didn't want to give up their rights to a powerful national government. They wanted to make sure that they would maintain some of the rights in their state. So let's look specifically at how we divide these things up. This is one of those things, guys, that you're just going to have to memorize. You are going to have to learn what the national government is responsible for and what the state government is responsible for. And as we go through this, I will try and give you some tips on how to help you remember it, but it is up to you to kind of memorize it. You just kind of have to study it. All right. So first we have our enumerated or expressed powers, which, as we remember, are the powers for the national government that are listed in the Constitution. They're actually written down that these are the powers of Congress. The national government is in charge of printing money. We don't want to have different money going state to state, right? When we go into Maryland or DC, we don't want to have to do a currency exchange, that we have one bunch of money for the United States. This also is important with regulating our economy, but we'll get into that a little bit more in our economics unit. The national government maintains an army and navy, as we talked about before. The national government makes treaties with other nations and countries. Again, we've talked about that a little bit before. The national government makes laws about immigration and naturalization. So when you become a citizen of the United States, you're a citizen in all 50 states. You don't become a citizen of Virginia or a citizen of Kansas. You become a citizen of the United States. So it makes sense that the U.S. would make policy about how that naturalization process works. The kinds of questions asked on that naturalization test, how many immigrants are allowed in every year, from which different nations, under what conditions, all of those things are decided by the national government. The national government also regulates commerce between states and with other countries. So again, that's trade agreements, but it's also with regulating businesses and having fair practices towards their employees. They're not discriminating against gender or religion, that there's a minimum wage. They're regulating all that stuff from the national level, so it's fair state to state. They also established a postal service. We don't want, if we're sending a letter, we don't want them to have to stop at the border of Virginia and trade off with the North Carolina Postal Service. And this was really important when the Constitution was written, because this was the main way that they communicated with each other. There wasn't any email or telephone or computers. So it was really important to have a solid postal service that would be a reliable way to get information throughout all of the United States. Also, declaring war is a national responsibility. We don't want Kansas to get all mad and declare war on Mexico or something like that, or Canada. So it has to go along with our national foreign policy, because it's our national military that enforces that foreign policy. All right, then we have reserved powers. These are the ones given specifically to state governments. So states are in charge of education or school issues. It's the state, the Virginia Department of Education, that determines what you learn here. Fairfax County has almost no say in what we have to teach in every one of your classes. It's the Virginia Department of Education. Fairfax County has different ways that we implement it possibly, but it is a state issue. And they do have to comply with some national regulations, but it is a right reserved for the state. Also, marriage license and driver's licenses. Those are different state to state. When I moved from California to Virginia, I had to get a new driver's license. I had to give up my California driver's license and get a Virginia driver's license. And states have the right to determine marriage laws within their state. States are also in charge of regulating business and trade within the state, which pretty much doesn't happen in today's world, because every business has some kind of internet or business that it does outside of the state, or it might buy supplies from outside of the state. But if there were a business that was just within the state, then the state would be in charge of that. Conducting elections is a state responsibility. So even though we might be electing the president, the states determine how we conduct our elections. In the state of Virginia, you have to be 18, you have to register to vote, you have to be a resident. In Virginia, we have to register 21 days in advance. In Massachusetts, you can actually register on the day of election and still cast your vote. But it's up to the states to figure out how they are going to conduct their elections. States also promote public health, safety, and welfare within a state. States provide police and emergency services. So we do have some county ones, but but it's all within the state, not national. States charter banks and corporations, and states establish local governments. Counties, cities, and towns in a state all get their power from the state constitutions. For example, Fairfax County gets power from Virginia's constitution. We have a charter from the Virginia General Assembly that says how we conduct our government in Fairfax County. So, states also use any power the Constitution doesn't give the federal government or deny the states. That's what the Ninth Amendment is about, that the states get to keep all the rights that are not specifically stated for the national government. So one way to look at it, why do we have marriage licenses? We'll look that over a little bit differently. And then there are concurrent powers shared by the state and local governments. These are powers shared by the national and state governments, so both the federal and the states collect taxes. When you have a job, you have to file income taxes with the national government and the federal government, and you also have to file income taxes with the state of Virginia. You have both of those. The states also have sales taxes and property taxes, but it is collecting taxes is a right that is concurrent. Borrowing money. The federal government can borrow money, and also states can borrow money. Maintaining roads and highways is a concurrent power. If there's a road that's just within the state of Virginia, then the state of Virginia has to maintain it. If it's one that goes through many different states, that's part of the interstate highway system, and that's maintained by the federal government. So for instance, I-95 that goes through many different states, that's maintained by the federal government. But roads like Fairfax County Parkway, that's just in the state of Virginia, are maintained by the state. Setting and maintaining prisons. If you break a law, a Virginia law, a state law, you're going to go to a state prison. If you break a federal law, you're going to go to a federal prison, but they both maintain prisons. Protecting public health and safety is concurrent, and also establishing courts. Again, if you are accused of breaking a federal law, you're going to go to a federal court. If you're accused of breaking a state law, you're going to go to a state court. Making and enforcing laws. We have national laws and we have state laws. They both make the laws and in fact use almost the exact same process. So what is important to understand about this? The Constitution of the United States establishes the principle of federalism, which is the division of power between the state and national government. Go ahead and answer these discussion questions on your paper. And we're going to answer questions, how much do you remember? Answer question 1, and answer question 2, answer question 3, answer question 4, answer question 5, answer question 6, answer question 7, and here are the sources. Thank you so much for watching the video today. I hope you learned a little bit about federalism and the specific powers of the national and state government. Thanks again.